Have you ever wondered, how do I get my crappy mixes that don't sound good in the car, they don't kind of stand up to the mixes from the pros, and how do I get them to sound like this?
SIKKY.
That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. 5 mixing things that I wish I knew when I started making music. So let's get into it.
I think the biggest thing that I've learned anyways is level balancing and gain staging. Ever since I started changing my input levels before they go into my plugins to actually minus 18 dB instead of leaving them touching almost to the top of my levels and then adjusting them with the fader. As you go down on the fader at the bottom, it's harder to get those 1 to 2 dB movements. So when you're actually gain staging to like whatever minus 14 to 18.
Yo, what's going on, you guys? Welcome back to another video. My name is SIKKY. So I've been making beats for roughly around 10 years at this point. And along the way, I've obviously learned a lot of things. I've made a lot of mistakes. And today what I really want to talk about are a few of the things that I wish I knew when I started making beats, a few things that I've learned in school, and a couple of quote unquote rules that I think that producers who feel like they're struggling with making good mixes should know and should kind of use as guidelines for this process. The first thing that I want to talk about is good sound selection. Now, good sound selection will make your life easier because you've already picked sounds that already complement the song that you're working on. You don't have to EQ, you don't have to do a bunch of compression. The reason why, when you see your favorite producers making beats and you hear the similar sounds that they use, like the rat kick, the spins, you know, all these sounds that they're used to using, those sounds are already tried and true. They work for the songs that they're working on. The other thing is it's easier to use the right sound rather than trying to take a sound and turn it into something that it's not. The thing about sound selection is sound selection and high quality sounds to me are different things. And the reason why sound selection is about picking sounds that complement what you already have. For example, if you have an ambient melody or just some guitars playing and lots of reverb, it might be kind of jarring to hear like a super distorted 808 just come out of nowhere and just it distracts the listener. They're like, what am I listening to? Like, what the hell was that, right? So in that case, you'd be picking a sound like, for example, a filtered out bass. Like in this song right now, what I could do is I could have a separate track and I can put a bass on it. And we're gonna just, you know, turn up the unison, put on a filter. So something like that already complements a sound versus picking something like this when you don't have the filter on it. It really stands out, and that to me is what sound selection is, picking the sounds that work within your song. At some point, your sound selection will just become second nature. You won't have to think about it. You just know what sounds kind of work with one another, and then you can kind of start experimenting by throwing in weird little things here and there. The second thing I wish I kind of knew when I started is levels, setting levels. I feel that picking good sounds and setting good levels is half the battle. It's half the mix. If the rest of it, you know, is just the cherry on top. This step is often overlooked because it's not as fun or as exciting as putting on a analog emulation of a console, or, you know, having saturation or multi-band this and like, if you can set good levels, those plugins that are so much fun to use are only going to enhance, right? Plugins should be used to enhance what's already there, not to necessarily shape it unless you're doing sound design. That being said, I know that there are absolutely no rules to making music, and there never should be. But I like to think of them as training wheels. Something that's going to help you as you get more experience and get better at mixing. And so I've come up with a list of things that you should kind of use as training wheels for when you're mixing, especially if you feel that you're struggling with this. The first training wheel rule that I have is to make sure that you don't have your levels on the master exceeding, let's say, past -12. The second mixing training wheel rule that I have is start by mixing your melodic elements and your bass 808 kind of sounds. So how I mix these elements usually doesn't happen on the mixer at all. Usually the sounds are not even routed to the mixer when I'm making the song. I'll be mixing the sounds, first of all, purely off of just setting levels in the channel rack here, the way that you see it. So let's check that out. And the other thing is, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, is about using buses, but I'm just gonna turn down the overall, all the melodies all together so that the 808's in focus. Right? So the next training wheel rule that I have is that your kick, more often than not in most mixes, so your kicks will usually hit somewhere between like 4 to 9 dBs louder than your 808. And the reason why I kind of say between this and this number is because depending on the overall tonal characteristic of all the sounds that you've used, the kick might need to be louder or can be quieter. The fourth training wheel rule I have is to set the levels of your snares and your hi-hats at quieter volumes. And the reason for this is that at really loud volumes, there's something called a Fletcher-Munson curve that our ears kind of perceive frequencies differently at louder or quieter volumes. And you don't want to be mixing the snare super loud because then it'll sound a lot more brighter and less punchier. You obviously want your snare to be very punchy when you play it loud. So mix it quietly and it'll make a huge difference. For the purpose of the video, I'm not going to turn down my monitors like I normally would. I'm gonna turn down the master fader, which you should not do. This is just so that you can kind of hear what I'm hearing. All right, so now when I turn this up, it should sound pretty decent because the levels still kind of sound good. That's kind of my rule. This next training wheel rule that I have is make sure that your kicks and 808s are in mono. And so the way that you do that in FL Studio is that you'll have one knob up here for the panning, left and right. The second knob that you have, when it turns purple like this, you're kind of pushing the sounds more towards mono. So your kicks, more often than not, do not need to be out here unless you're doing it kind of as a little special effect for a brief moment in the song. But in this song, what I have done is I do have the kick kind of panning towards the end right here, right? And if I made the song sound mono here, it would all hit in the middle and it would not sound very cool because now it's not panning and it's not sounding as interesting as I intended for it to do. Right? And the 808, since I'm not sliding in this song, I'm going to have it kind of mono. Right? There we go. Now I've got two more training wheel rules. The next training wheel rule that I have is that if you feel that you're doing a lot of EQing to get the sound to fit, chances are the sound that you have isn't the right sound. Unless you're doing sound design and you're just filtering something out because that's the point, that you're trying to make a different sound. Something like the 808, if you have to make cuts like this, for example, to make room for the kick a little bit more, because I know my kick is hitting at around 60. So I'm going to come into 60 here, and I'm just gonna cut it down just a dB or two. And the kick sounds a little bit more punchier. Now, if you have to do like cuts like this, when you're doing like, I don't know, 12, 13 dB like that, you can negatively impact. Like, sure, you're creating space for the kick, but your 808 now lost all its body. All that meat that's there is gone. So you don't want to make moves like that. You want to do them very subtly with intent. And the last mixing training wheel that I have is step back and ask yourself what needs to be fixed rather than putting plugins on, trying to find something to fix. Ask those questions. At that point, you're kind of mixing with intention. You're doing it because you actually hear something. The fourth thing that I kind of wish I knew when I started is to leave everything off of your master when you are mixing. A very common thing that's kind of discussed online is, hey, put a soft clipper on instead of a limiter, or take your limiter off and replace it with this. And I can understand why that's such common practice, but let me kind of share with you why I don't think this is a good idea. A soft clipper is a type of limiter. A limiter is a form of compression. Compression changes the dynamic range of a sound. And when you are feeding your whole song through this, you are making decisions on your mix based on the makeup that you're putting over the whole master. Because of that, it's better that you have your mix sound good without putting a bunch of plugins on there. In fact, what you're seeing on here right now on my screen are plugins that I have for the master when I finished mastering. In fact, what you're listening, however, is unmastered. So just putting that out there. So when you're working on a brand new song, make sure that there's nothing on the master, especially because if you're practicing good gain staging and your sounds are hitting at that like -12 to -18, your level isn't even getting anywhere near the threshold of that soft clipper to really be affected. So there's no point in having it there. And if you can hear this mix right now with no soft clipper on it, and when I play it, if it sounds good to you, think about how good it can sound when you put some mastering on it. So let me show you what this song kind of sounds like before mastering and then after mastering. Right? It sounds that much better, to me at least, because it's already mixed well. Anything that you put on top of it is going to take it that much further. So don't rely on mastering to making the mix sound incredible if it already doesn't sound good without it. So the fourth thing that I wish I knew when I started was to use groups and buses. Now, what's a group? Group is basically taking all your instrument tracks, for example, all my melody instruments, and sending them to only one track so that I can control the volume of all of those instruments all at once, or process them through the same plugin. And the benefit of this is that not only can I change the volume of all of the instruments all together, like so, but I can also process all of those instruments together by putting, for example, an EQ on that group, or putting a gross beat over only the melody instruments rather than all the drums. If I wanted to process all of these tracks with reverb, I could put 4 reverb plugins on each and every single one. Now, buses are just another track that can be used for multiple things. You can use it to group all your tracks, which is what I've done here, right? When I've tracked all of them to this one track. Or another way that you can use them is to help you save on CPU power. So if you don't have a super powerful computer and you don't want to put a reverb plugin on each and every single track by themselves, or if you just want to put reverb on this guitar track and this guitar track, but not on the synth bass, but you do want it on the lead synth, you can't do that with all the sounds grouped to one track, right? So the solution to that is to use what is called auxiliary tracks or buses. Now, in my case, what I've done here is I've right-clicked and docked this track to the right. And we'll do another one of those here. And we have this one that I've labeled reverb one. We're gonna put reverb on it, doesn't matter what reverb, just like that. Let's say we wanna send this guitar track to the reverb. So how we do that is we come down to the bottom, we click this up arrow, and you'll see a cable is now running to that track. And this knob determines the amount you send to that reverb track. So let's just kind of listen to that track by itself. And we're going to go into the reverb. And what we're gonna do is we're going to send that guitar track to the reverb, and let's see how that sounds. Right? This is a really CPU saving, quick method for building your songs. In fact, my new template that I'm building for myself is going to have this so that I don't have to, I can quickly work on this stuff, add reverb on the tracks that I want to add reverb on. So this is definitely a really cool way to save on your CPU power, but it's also a very popular pro thing that a lot of professional studios will do, especially in Pro Tools, especially in Logic, and it's a feature that I would love to see more people using with their beats. Cool? Cool. Okay, so the last thing that I wish I kind of knew when I started, and I debated putting this in the front because I think it could be the most important thing I tell you guys today, and that is to find a reputable source for the information that you're searching for. With the internet, you can type whatever you want to learn, whatever you want to know about, and you'll find 100 different sources for this information. But not all the information is either true or helpful. A great example of this was in 2012 when I had learned how to do the Haas effect, essentially delaying the signal in one ear so that you kind of get this quick zapping effect between the ear that makes a mono sound stereo. And the problem with this was at the time I had just learned what I had learned and just started using it, not knowing the negative impacts, which now I understand was you have phase issues, playing your songs in mono and elements disappearing because they're canceling in phase. So I encourage you guys to read up on this information that you're learning online from a few different sources so you can come up with a good conclusion. So when it comes to finding good information or learning material, a good place that I look for is Bobby Owsinski's music blog. Sound on Sound magazine's glossary section is cool. Isotope and FabFilter's YouTube video and their channel and their blog. Pensado's Place is a great place to learn. So basically find a reputable source and avoid fake news. Anyways, so that's all I have for today's video, you guys. I want to hear from you guys what you wish you kind of knew when you started making music and mixing, what mistakes you wish you could have avoided earlier on, things that you wish you could have learned sooner. If you liked the video, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe, turn on all those post notifications, and I'm going to catch you guys in the next video. Peace.